For this Author's Corner, I'm talking to Gregg Levoy, the author of Callings, and I'm very excited about talking to Gregg. This book I found personally meaningful, and I've found it to be incredibly insightful, and so I'm delighted to hear what Gregg has to say about this very important topic. Gregg, thank you for spending some time with us.
My pleasure.
I'm very excited, as I said. I'm really interested in asking you, as a journalist, this was really your background, how is it that you were drawn to the topic of finding your calling?
Right. I, years ago, ran across an Italian writer by the name of Alberto Moravia, who said something very interesting. He said he thought it was important in life to pursue the one problem you were born to understand. And when I read that, I thought, this is one of mine. This has been a lifelong fascination about how people create a life that actually belongs to them and isn't a knockoff, that really has some passion, some power, a sense of purpose to it. And maybe it traces back to growing up in a family where neither one of my parents did what they wanted to do with their lives.
There's a lot that's been written about this idea of callings, but what is it? How would you define, if people say, I'm looking for my calling,
yeah.
What is that?
Yeah, now I'm defining this very broadly, secularly, pluralistically, the urgings, the promptings, the imperatives that come from deep inside our life, okay, that tell us what it's going to take to stay true to true north, all right? So dreams, they come through a lot of different channels, symptoms, intuitions, passions, books that mysteriously make their way onto your night table, the way events unfold, the language of the body. The callings, I think, come in a lot of different forms. And my bias is to encourage people not to be looking up there for the burning bushes and the chariots streaking across the sky approach to following callings, so much as the scrawny cries approach. You know what I'm saying? I'm thinking of a poem by Wallace Stevens. He says, I don't ask for the full ringing of the bell. I don't ask for a clap of thunder. A scrawny cry will do. And that, to me, is where the discernment arts really come in, is looking for the subtle clues, the ones that are right here in your own backyard.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Say more about this, the discernment arts. Very interesting phrase. What is that?
Well, it's the work, I think, of figuring out what your life is calling for from you. And I think it's really just in the small steps approach, is to just turn on the receiver. Just for starters, turn on the receiver, which is a high art in itself for some people, because this requires that you are willing to hear what you hear when you turn on the receiver. And I think at some level people know that if they turn on the receiver and begin to listen to what their life is really calling for from them, it's going to short them out. It's going to frighten them. Because at some level, I think people have an intuition about what their calls are.
Do you think everyone has a calling?
Many, in my opinion. My take is there are work-related calls, but there's also lifestyle calls, service calls, moral calls, relationship calls, spiritual calls. The ones you got when you were 20, aren't they really different than the ones you're getting at 50? Different than the ones we get at 70? You know, there's a developmental aspect. So I think in multiples. I think in multiples when it comes to callings. There's not just one. There are many of them. And there are momentary calls, an intuition of whether to pick up the phone when it rings or not, whether to make a left or a right here at the corner. You know what I'm saying? Whether to say yes or no to an offer.
Learning to listen to our dreams. I'd like to ask you to share a bit more about that in a moment. The idea of dream journal that I believe you've brought up, or the idea of capturing your dreams and with writing them down and then sort of asking, you know, what am I being taught here? I also would really appreciate if you'd spend just a moment talking about pilgrimaging, making pilgrimage.
Yeah, I think there's lots of ways of knowing. And to the degree that what we're after in ascertaining passions and a sense of purpose and calls is about needing to know something, there's lots of ways of knowing. If you are one of those people who has good dream recall and you're inclined that way, I would say keep a dream log by the bed. But practices like journaling, if that's more your style, going on retreats like you did, if that's your style, And there's lots of ways of knowing. There's intuitive skills, there's contemplative reading, like Joseph Campbell, you mentioned him. He locked himself in a cabin for 5 years and did nothing but read for 5 years. So there's lots of ways of knowing. And I just think it's about finding the one that really speaks to you. Some people, their way of knowing happens best in a group, whose members get together to wake up in some fashion. So they join a men's group, or a women's group, or a spiritual group, or a 12-step group. You know, any group whose members are looking for awakening. For some people, that's their style. But any tool that strikes up a dialogue with the deep self is really what I'm suggesting people do. Any kind of practice like that.
Would you say something about, I know you have a viewpoint around the power of dialogue between people for discovery of call, and can you say some more about that?
I think that you alone are called, but that doesn't mean you have to do it all by yourself. And I'm a really big believer in drawing on the power of community to help discern what your calls are. This is why I borrow the Quaker tradition of the clearness committees. It's a group of people you pull together, maybe 10 people, to help clarify. And this is the whole purpose of the clearness committee, to clarify a person's calling. So you get in the middle and you explain to people, this is what I need clarity about. And then all people do for an hour or two is ask you questions. No advice, no storytelling, no, let me tell you about the time this happened to me, no fixing, no problem solving, and no devil's advocacy questions. Questions only in the service of eliciting, evoking what people already know. You know, so this, I think this isn't even really dialogue in the traditional sense, but the power of asking questions and putting yourself in the position. Another way to draw on community is brainstorming, right? You tell people what you need lots of ideas on, and a group just storms you, and all you do is write. All you do is receive. But not to do it all by yourself.
Let me throw out a hypothesis, and you respond. The hypothesis is this: that all callings are meant to serve the community and to serve others, even in ways that you may not understand, and that when you act upon, surrender to, execute, move toward that calling, you'll find a lot of happiness in that, but that's not what it was about originally. It was about serving that community. What do you think about that notion?
I love that notion. I think that's a wonderful notion. I did a callings weekend retreat for a nonprofit called Earth Stewards Network in Massachusetts a couple years ago. And I'm standing out in the parking lot on the Friday that this thing begins, just unpacking my car. This guy pulls into the parking lot, gets out of his car and motions me over, tells me that he had taken one of my workshops some other place a few years before, and he wanted to share with me the calling that had emerged for him as a result of that prior workshop. And the way he phrased it was, I'm going to get in my car and start it up. I want you to bend down and smell the exhaust. Among the stranger requests I've had in my time. And so I bent down, and the exhaust that came out of the back of his car smelled to me like a McDonald's, a fast food place. And he explained that he had recently invented a process that could turn used French fry oil into non-polluting fuel for automobiles. Okay? In fact, he was calling it McFuel. And he was about to embark on a one-year pilgrimage in that car, driving it around America to drum up media support for this breakthrough. Now, what went through my mind when he told me this was, first of all, people are amazing. Their initiative, their passion, their compassion, when they're sufficiently fired up and in line with their calls, is remarkable to me, consistently. And the other thing that had struck me was, you never know who's watching. One person, in this case it happened to be me, one person following my own passion to teach had a profound effect on the unfolding of another person's calling in the world, and without the first person even being aware of it. You know what I'm saying? So that's why I say that just you doing your own good works in the world can have a tremendous impact, and that is service.